Here we go, on to Chapter 9, Assembling the Modules. We're going to need the Swashplate out of Tray 1, and we're also going to need bags 6.6 and 6.7. The modules that they're going to be talking about is going to be our Swashplate assembly, our main head assembly. We're going to combine the two of those together to go onto the main shaft. Also, we're going to be making up our linkage rod B assembly to attach to that as well. The A-rod assembly should already be done from a previous step, so we'll get those parts together and get that installed on the main shaft. Okay, so here are the parts from bags 6.6 and 6.7. In 6.6 we have our ball links and our set screws that are going to join in the center of the ball links to make up our linkage rod B assembly. We also have our anti-rotation uniball, I believe that's what they're calling it, or maybe they just call it a uniball. And then the other swash balls to go onto the swash plate. There is 2 SAB logos on the swash plate, and then there's 3 points for the balls to go to, so I'll probably use the one without the logo for my long uniball here, and then I'll put the 2 shorter balls here. Also note, we have 2 sets of different sized balls. The 4 balls with the shorter threaded section are going to go on the inner race of your swash, and the 2 balls with the longer threaded section will be used on the outer portion of the swash. Alright, there we have all the linkage balls attached to the swash plate. Next we will make up our linkage rod B assembly. We'll make 3 of them. They're spec'ing 44.5 millimeters from outside to outside. Okay, so now we have our swash plate with our linkage rod B assemblies made up and attached to the swash plate. We got these as close as we could to 44.5 millimeters, which is just going to be a ballpark. You're going to finalize that once you get the servos in and set up the radio system. Now we're going to attach the swash plate and the head assembly, which we have here, onto the main shaft of the helicopter. Okay, so what we have here now is the completion of Assembly 9, the modules, assembling the modules. What we've got now is we've got our swash plate and our linkage rods that go from the swash plate to the servos are attached. The head block is attached to the main shaft. We have our linkage A rods attached from the blade grips to the swash plate. So that whole assembly is ready to go now. Just waiting on installation of servos. Like I said, those are going to be a little while yet. Not exactly 100% sure which way I'm going. On a positive note, I was just a little uneasy with the notchy blade grip bearing that I had on the one blade grip. I'm not even sure which one it is anymore. My friend Dave from Anything Heli said, "Hey man, I got the solution for you. I've had notchy bearings like that before that were loaded with Loctite." And this is what he said. A little bit of Tri-Flow penetrates, superior lubricant, penetrates, protects, formulated PTF. I'm not sure what that all means, but I'm guessing any cleaner, degreaser, whatnot, soak them in that, blast them out, work it around. That thing freed right up. I was really amazed, actually. I also installed the motor plate into the frame assembly. My motor should be here next week, I hope. And we'll get that installed, and I'll touch base on that, the parts you need and everything. I just put it in here for now, so the parts just didn't get lost or whatever. So, again, that's the completion of Chapter 9, Assembling the Modules. Okay, so on to Chapter 14, the tail boom assembly. We're going to be working with bags 7-3 and 7-4. We're going to be working on the locking element of the tail assembly. We're also going to be working on installing the push rod guide into the tail assembly, as well as building the push rod. Okay, and then finally we will come back and we will put on the whole tail rotor assembly onto the boom, and that'll complete our boom ready to install onto the frames. For the tail rotor assembly, they talk about using CA or super glue to glue these rods into the push rod. Okay, I'm going to be using epoxy. I'm in the northern region, North Dakota. In the cold weather climate, the CA will get brittle and break. Therefore, this will come loose and you'll lose tail control. So I'm going to use epoxy. Also, what I'm going to be doing is installing a brass sleeve over the end of the carbon rod. And what that will do, when that's epoxied on there, that'll keep the carbon rod from trying to split out over time. I'm not saying this can happen to everybody, but it is a precautionary thing. I know that Bert talked about using thread and then coating it all with CA and then covering it with a piece of shrink wrap to strengthen this area here. I believe this tip came from Ray Stacy. I'm not sure 100% where it came from, but I think that's where it was, and it was a good idea. All this brass sleeve is out of a broken set of main blades. Okay, push that out, and then that's the perfect size to go on this push rod. So that'll be epoxied on there as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the tail push rod assembly. We'll get the epoxy on there. While that's drying, we'll work on the rest of the boom assembly. Okay, so what I've done here is I've mixed up some 2-part epoxy, some 15-minute epoxy, and I'm just going to get a little bit, can't get this on the camera, dabbed into the end of the push rod assembly. And then I'm going to coat the end of the linkage rod. The manual specs, they want 10 millimeters left exposed on this, which is basically the whole threaded section of this rod. And we're going to insert that into the push rod. Get that epoxy coated everywhere, get it all smeared around. Okay, I'm going to leave a little bit sticking out right now so I can wipe just a little bit of the excess off here. Okay, and then I'm also going to coat the outside of the push rod. And then we're going to slide our brass sleeve over that. And I'm going to slide it on, move some of that epoxy back out to the end, and then slide it on from the opposite way, 180 degrees around. So the whole inside of the brass tube and our sleeve, or our carbon rod, everything's coated with a good amount of epoxy. Wipe off the excess there. Make sure it's flush with the end here. Then we're going to get our push rod. We're going to get that set to 10 millimeters. Exposed from the end. Alright, now I'm going to do the other end. Okay, so now we're going to be working with the locking element of the tail assembly. And what we got here is 2 carbon fiber pieces with lock nuts already embedded into the carbon fiber. We have 2 pieces of double-sided tape. We have our 4 bolts for putting this assembly together, which are going to be 3 by 10 millimeter, and then our finishing washers. So what the 2-sided tape is for is you're going to stick that to the back side of this carbon fiber plate, and then that is going to be inserted to the inside of the boom. Okay? The carbon plate with the tape on it will stick to the inside. You'll run your bolts through to align that up, and then snug the bolts down, get that tape squished in there, set in there nice in place. Leave that set up for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes while you're doing something else. And then you'll come back, and after that's all done, we will probably install the pushrod guide. That'll give that tape a little time to set up good. And then we'll come back and undo our bolts, and then we'll put our tail rotor assembly onto the boom. Okay, so here we have one of the bolts in the boom, and then I've got the two-sided tape attached to the carbon fiber backer with the bolts, or the nuts, already locked into it. What we're going to do is we're going to slide this up inside the boom using the bolt to capture our plate, and then looking through the hole, we line up the other one and snug both of those bolts down, and that'll line up that plate and lock it in place into the boom. Just snug it up, doesn't need to be super tight. What we're doing is just getting that two-sided tape to adhere to the inside of the boom, so when we take these bolts out, everything stays in place. Now I'll do the other side. Okay, so while those are kind of tacking up so they adhere good to the inside of the boom, we're going to grab the tail pushrod support, or the guide, and a 2.5 by 8 millimeter screw. Okay, what we want to do with this, as well as some of the other plastic parts I may have mentioned, I may not have, we want to pre-thread this, because especially on the boom here, we're going to be up inside the boom and we don't really have any room to work, you know, get our hands in there and support it while we're threading this in. So we're going to thread that all the way in, then we're going to back it out, so that when we go to put it inside the boom, it should thread in easier for us. The other thing I want to check is when I put the push rod in here, if this is tight or bindy at all. Okay, in Bert's video, he mentioned opening this up a little bit. Mine seems really smooth, so I'm not going to open it up at all. I'm going to leave it just as it came from the factory. So what we want to do here is we're going to reach in and hopefully in one step, I haven't tried this yet, get this to slide in the boom and into the groove. There it is. Look at that. They made that hole just big enough, I think. And then we're going to run our screw in, and it should just go in nicely because we've already pre-threaded that hole, and it feels like it's running right in there. And we'll bring that down and snug that up. Not overly tight, we're just dealing with plastic, we don't want to strip that out. And there you go, you have it. She's inside the boom. So now what we're going to do next is I'm going to remove the 4 bolts that I've put in here to help set these carbon fiber backers in place with the two-sided tape. We've given that a couple minutes just to adhere nice in there, so when we're putting the bolts back in, it doesn't move around on us. We're going to get our tail belt slid through the boom, then we're going to slide the tail rotor assembly onto the boom, and then using these 4 bolts, attach the tail rotor assembly to the boom. Alright, so there you have it. We got the tail rotor assembly attached to the tail boom now. I've left the bolts loose so we can slide that back and forth. That's how we're going to tension our belt. As you can see, the belt runs through the other end. Spins the tail rotor. Okay, so while we were finishing up the tail boom itself, the epoxy has had time to cure on the push rod. 15-minute epoxy. Works pretty good. I will let this dry, for another hour or two while I'm doing other stuff before I thread on our ball link. You want to make sure that epoxy is fully cured in there before you start threading that in. You can see here the epoxy pushed up on the brass tube as we slid that over the carbon rod, making a nice little fillet there so that tube can't move around. There's a good coat of epoxy up on the end of here. Really tough to see. So that's going to be a good solid joint. That shouldn't splinter, it shouldn't come out of there, it shouldn't break loose over time. That's going to be probably the most solid joint you can do on these tail push rods. So next we'll come back and we'll actually install the boom into the main frames. Okay, so here we have the frame. You want to make sure these two bolts here are backed out far enough so when we slide the boom in, that the boom can slide over the clamp. Okay? The other thing you want to make sure of is you want to look down, you want to sight down your boom. Make sure you don't have any twists in the belt. Okay? What you want to do with the boom in the correct orientation, you're going to want to rotate the belt 90 degrees counterclockwise. So when the head spins, your tail will still turn the right direction. We're going to slide that up in between the frames. Pull that forward. We'll slip the boom over the locking mechanism. And then we're going to kind of pull and push on the frame a little bit. This is a really tight fit. There you go, she slid into place there. Double check that side. One thing I didn't show you, there's two dimples on the boom. Okay, those two dimples key into these rubber grommets. Remember my favorite rubber grommets? So you want to make sure those line up in there. Those are going to give support to the boom as well. Then we're going to take our wrench that came with the kit, make sure the boom is all the way in as far as it can go, and we're going to tighten these two nuts up here. Okay, they don't got to be extremely tight, but firmly tight. They are plastic. And what you want to do is when you tighten them, make sure that when they're tight, two flat sides face each other in the center here. Flat side here, flat side here. The reason for that is this boom bolt safety block is going to go down in between those two guys. And make sure you have Loctite on that. And what that's going to do is keep these two nuts from being able to turn. Because in order to turn, they would have to clear this square piece of carbon fiber. See if I can zoom in on that a little bit. See that? That nut can't turn back out because of that piece of carbon fiber there. Now at this point, the boom is in the frames. We're going to want to take our 4 bolts that I've already pre-applied Loctite to and put these in the 4 remaining holes, 2 on each side. There you have the boom installed into the frames. I'm going to get the tail belt situated, and then we'll talk about the tail belt tension. Okay, so here we're going to talk about tightening the belt. right or wrong or indifferent, this is how I do it. I've done this on my 630, and now I'm going to do this on the 500. Okay, right now we have the 4 bolts loose, so this assembly can slide back and forth to tension the belt. Okay, so what I do, grab on either side of the tail case back here, and I'm pulling back, okay, pulling back, and just kind of wiggle it till I find my nice kind of centered spot, because you can swing this either side and your tail shaft won't be perpendicular to the boom. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just putting tension on it, kind of wiggling it back and forth, and then with my left hand, okay, because I'm a right-handed person, I'm just pinching there at the boom, and now I'm going to come in here, snug this guy down, come around over here, snug that guy down, and then tighten the other two as well. So the main thing you're looking for here is making sure that your tail shaft isn't out of alignment with the boom. You want that thing perpendicular to the boom. Okay? Another thing to note that people will struggle with is getting the tail belt centered on this pulley. I myself am only concerned that it's not trying to ride up the high side of the pulley there. If you look really closely, I don't know if the camera will pick this up, sure it will. There's just a little bit of gap on both sides. It's tighter on the one side than the other, but it's not trying to ride up that shield. Okay, so that also is going to tell you that you're pretty well centered in there. The reason it's going to run to that side is because when you put your belt in, you're giving it a twist, so it's going to pull over in the direction of the twist. The main thing to concern yourself with is just to make sure it's not trying to ride up that face of that pulley. Okay? Here we are with part of chapter 15, which covers the battery and canopy installation and preparation. We're going to be working with the canopy right now. We're going to install the canopy grommets onto the canopy, as well as the protective foam tape that lines the inner edge of the canopy to protect it where it rides along the frame. Okay, so here's what we got now. After we did the grommets in the canopy, we got one grommet on either side, of course, for mounting the canopy. We've also installed our protective foam along the inside here. That's going to protect the canopy, more or less protect the frame from the canopy chafing on the side of the frame, and at the back for the boom as well. And what I did when I did this process is I started at the back. I started at the corner here and got this in here nice and tight, just ran the strip right off the end and then just cut it off. You know, followed this radius here. And then I did the same thing on the other side. The piece that I cut off from this side, I used on this side because of the angle that when I cut it off. So then I butted those two right up against one another. I don't know if the camera picks that up or not. Okay, you can see right there. And then just ran the length of that along down here. I don't know that you need to go all the way up into this corner, but there was plenty of it there, so I put it on. It looks like it stops touching about right in this area, so you could stop there, save the leftover for something else, or if you chew this up or something, you can replace it. So, like I said, we got the two grommets in, one on either side, and the foam to protect the frames from the fiberglass canopy rubbing on the side of the frames, scratching it up.